Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm John Klaus. I'm on the program committee for the League of Women Voters. And tonight's Learn with the League, a monthly presentation of the League. Tonight's Learn with the League is about human trafficking, or more specifically, human trafficking for the sex industry. Our speaker is Melody Stone, and she is a licensed mental health counselor, and she's trauma trained as a clinical therapist. And she will discuss with us how working collaboratively to both dismantle the root causes driving the commercial sex industry and to create a restorative model can bring healing to the victims as well as the many perpetrators. Not all perpetrators will be candidates for restorative justice, but prison systems alone do not bring about systemic change. By making a paradigm shift, addressing the root issues that perpetrate demand in the sex industry, we can create a way for restorative hope and freedom to occur within this culture. So we have a whole bunch of people coming in now. I don't know where you've been, but you're at the right place.
We've been on a bus.
You've been on a bus, okay, great.
We've been on a bus from North.
Oh, very good. Well, welcome.
The bus was late, John.
And the bus was late. Okay, good. It wasn't my fault. Very good. Thank you for coming, folks. All right, having said more than enough, I'm going to turn this now over to our presenter, Melody Stone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be here tonight. And I chose this topic, Rising Hope in the Heartland, a restorative approach for dismantling demand in sex trafficking, because as of this current date, the state of Iowa still has an F grade on the national report card with Shared Hope International. And they do, that's a national or international anti-trafficking organization, and they grade each one of our states every year and give us a report card on how we're doing with anti-trafficking efforts. And that has to do with all aspects of trafficking, whether you're helping survivors or you're in law enforcement, criminal justice, or the buyer side of the demand side of trafficking. So right now we have an F on the report card, and that's very disheartening to me because I am an avid abolitionist. To end slavery, modern day slavery, we have more slavery going on now in the world than we've ever had in history. And it's important that we, as Iowans, are, take a stand and do what we can to turn the tide on the fastest growing worldwide criminal enterprise. Right now it has surpassed, it's about to surpass drugs and weapons. We've already surpassed weapons, illegal weapons, and now we're on the verge of surpassing illegal drugs, because you can sell a drug or a weapon one time, but you can sell a human being multiple times. So it's an extremely lucrative enterprise, and we need to really put forth robust efforts to curtail what's going on with human trafficking. So in terms of the issue of demand, there's three types of demand. In person, so people soliciting other human beings in person, and virtually, and then digitally, which would be like through movies and media and things like that. So it happens in several different ways. In 2013, the U.S. Department of Justice established what they call Demand Forum. And the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, which now maintains Demand Forum, proposed a systemic assessment of current demand reduction tactics and an expanded tactic typology to reflect recent innovations intended to reduce the demand that drives sex trafficking markets. So we know that the Department of Justice and other groups are really now turning their attention to demand, because it's like with any business, you have supply and demand. And if you don't have demand for a product, then no one wants it anymore, right? You don't have a business, right? So we really need to focus a lot of efforts on the demand side of trafficking and, eliminate that, or it's never going to be completely eliminated, but really work to eliminate it. So we'll go down to the next slide here. So when we look at systemic issues in sex trafficking, I just thought this quote was kind of interesting. It says, "You can't talk yourself out of something you behaved yourself into." So think about that. We all have thoughts and beliefs and prejudices and opinions about things. But if we're locked into those things and then resulting from those are our behaviors, we have to back up and look at what's going on systemically. So behavior comes from our beliefs that develop over time, beginning in the womb and through bonding and attachment, life experiences, our temperament, how resilient we are, how we were raised, our values and beliefs, gender identity, cultural norms, societal values, basic needs, habits, addictions, media and marketing, and psychology. So there's lots of different things that shape our behavior. So when years ago I worked at a residential treatment facility. It was called Girard at that time, Girard of Iowa. Maybe some of you remember that. And I remember when I was young and I was taking my training, my supervisor said, "Melody, we have a needs achievement program here. And it's about helping our kids in this program make adaptive choices rather than the maladaptive choices they're making in society and their families and in schools and things like that." So human behavior is essentially about meeting needs. And these can be met in adaptive or maladaptive ways. So some of you know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, theory of human motivation. And these, it says here what those needs are. And so Maslow actually broke it down and said, okay, when you look at Coca-Cola, for instance, a product, you can look at the hierarchy of needs through a consumer product like Coca-Cola or a chocolate company or vodka, things like that. So ads appeal to sex, power, and money, and it drives our needs to purchase products. And then Erickson's psychosocial model of 8 stages of human development, and those include, and I'll let you read through those 8 stages, and it has to do with meeting needs as well. So I'm not going to get into the weeds on all that tonight, but that's kind of like just the foundation for what we're going to talk about. So we know that we live in a sex and porn-driven society. More than 70% of all pornography is produced right here in the United States. 70% of all the pornography in the world is produced right here. And where do we get the product? Where do we get, in order to produce porn, where do we get our commodity for that? It's from our own citizens primarily. We're not shipping people in from overseas, other places like Thailand and Cambodia and other places. It's right here. A lot of times it's minors. It's people that are underage that are being groomed into trafficking, and they're broken into this criminal enterprise through the porn industry lots of times. So the facts are that experts predict human trafficking will surpass the illegal drug market, and I already mentioned that. And then I mentioned about the pornography being 70% produced here. Those and where we, over 40% of victims in federal sex trafficking cases are recruited online, with 59% of those victims being recruited on Facebook or other social media sites. I go around the state of Iowa, and at no cost, I will train in schools, youth groups, youth clubs and organizations, going into church youth groups and other places, and teach students about online safety, because the traffickers are trolling the internet 24/7, and they know exactly what they're looking for. They know the kids' vulnerabilities. It's not just kids, but it's adults as well. They know our vulnerabilities, and they know exactly how to target people. So basically, it's an exploitation of vulnerabilities. So pornography, as I've said, is a gateway to human trafficking. Sex trafficking includes residence-based, familial, online grooming, and interactive sexual acts or sextortion. Street-based escort delivery services, and labor trafficking includes begging and peddling rings, travel sales, agricultural construction, factories, retails, housekeeping, nanny services, and healthcare. Sex and labor trafficking include domestic work, illicit massage or spa, health, motel, hotel-based, hospitality businesses, bars, strip clubs, cantinas, modeling, beauty, photography, and fake nonprofit organizations. When I lived in Hawaii for 7 years, I moved back to Iowa after living there for 7 years. And there was a trafficker there that had a nonprofit organization. It was a false organization, just a front for his trafficking operations. And he would go into the schools and to the libraries and other places, and he would target young students that were usually juniors, seniors in high school, maybe were applying for scholarships for college, and he would say, "Oh, I can help you. That's my business. That's what I do. And if you'll meet me for coffee, then I'll help you, get some good scholarships." And he had brochures and business cards, and it looked like a legitimate operation, but it was not. And so one of my daughters actually worked in the public library in Kona, Hawaii, and he walked in one day, and I happened to be in the library, so I watched him in action. And I was able to safely intervene after he left, but this young girl went to my daughter's school, and she was a senior in high school doing some research on college entrance exams, and he had come in and targeted her, and I spoke with her privately, and I said, you don't want to go with him. You don't ever want to meet him. And so she was shocked, but we knew what he was doing, the operations he was involved with. So we've already talked about that, and we'll go to the next slide. So the myths, these are some of the myths. There's a lot of different myths, but if a trafficked person consented to be in their situation, then it cannot be human trafficking or against their will because they knew better. That is a myth. Okay, they're groomed in, and by the time they realize they're in trouble, it's too late. You're already ensnared. Another myth is people being trafficked are physically unable to leave their situations. They're locked in, held against their will, chained up, things like that. That can happen. However, lots of times you'll see people maybe out on the streets, or you might see them in restaurants. I've intercepted situations at beaches in Hawaii, Starbucks, Panda Express, other places where I might have had the opportunity to safely intervene in a situation. By the way, you know, it's not a good idea for people to insert themselves in these situations unless you know what you're doing and you're trained. But sometimes you can safely intervene and talk with a person if you see something that is a red flag. So mostly people are not held against their will, but they see no safe way to escape. They're terrified of their trafficker because their traffickers will not hesitate to take them out or their families, to kill or beat them up, or even their family members. I worked with one young girl, and a trafficker she tried to escape twice from her trafficker, and he said, if you try to escape again, I know where your family lives, I know everything about you, and I know, you know, your brothers and sisters, and I'll go get your 5-year-old brother, and I'm going to traffic him. And so this girl was desperate to escape, and she ran one more time, and he did get the brother. He found her, locked her up, went and got the brother, and trafficked him for 5 months, and then ended up killing him. So, you know, they don't hesitate. They don't bat an eye over taking you out. So it's really, they use fear tactics and power and control and gaslighting and things like that. So another myth is that, and this part is not a myth, as in terms of it's being the oldest profession and people who do sex work choose this life. That part is certainly a myth. 95% of people that are groomed into what we might call prostitution as adults, they were groomed in as minors. And on their 18th birthday, they didn't just say, well, you know what, I'm out of here. It doesn't happen. They're terrified of their traffickers. So lots of times people are underage. And that's why I go out and do the online safety presentations, because the common age that a little boy is exposed to pornography is 7 years old, and little girls 8 years old. And so, you know, they might be, like my grandson was 7 last year, and he was playing a race car game on his mom's phone, and an ad popped up. Well, it was porn. And so he was exposed to porn, and we talked with him about that. I told my kids, I said, you know, you need to watch out for this and put blocks on and really pay attention to what's going on, you know. So now they're very careful about it. But anyway, another myth is that human trafficking only happens in illegal or underground industries. That's not true. We have a huge signs down in Cedar Rapids area for gentlemen's clubs. Have you seen some of those driving down the interstate? They're just these big signs. So you know what's going on there, but they can legally operate. So another myth is pornography is no big deal because what people consume online is their business. It's just a harmless activity or outlet. I've had coffee with many people that have been, you know, the whole spectrum is that some people want everybody thrown into prison that buys or sells a human being. Just throw them into prison, throw away the key, they never see the light of day again. The other extreme is we want to legalize it all, just let it happen. So we've got everything in between, and so people will believe that it's a harmless activity, and we know that it's not, that it does a lot of damage. And then just the myth that boys will be boys, the end justifies the means. You know, how many of us have heard that phrase? Well, boys will be boys, you know, and so that's another myth that is perpetrated in society. Buying sex is really a male problem in society. Christopher Stoller, he's an award-winning author of The Black Lens, spoke at the 2018 Shared Hope International Conference on reasons why men solicit. As the demand reduction coordinator for She Has a Name, I have personally taught dozens of men through the John School program in Ohio. This was Christopher speaking. These programs scattered across the country are run by licensed counselors, survivors of sex trafficking, and others in the community. Classes range in length from 1 day to 10 weeks. They target men who are mostly first-time offenders with no prior record or assault or domestic violence. They are often identified through sting operations and at the court's discretion may be referred to diversion programs. Buyers are often men with families from all occupations and are usually respected citizens within their communities with disposable incomes. So you could have judges, lawyers, educators, doctors, people from all walks of life, construction workers, any man that has disposable income could be a buyer of sex trafficking or a buyer. So in his research, Christopher asked the question, why do men solicit? And She Has a Name began collecting data in 2016 on why men solicit. Data collected at that time indicated the following reasons. Now this was just a group of 200 men that they interviewed or questioned about this. So the number one reason was lack, oh, I have a typo there. Lack of intimacy, 24%. Loneliness, 24%. Depression, 14%. Pornography, 10%. Lust, 10%. Lack of discipline, 5%. Being sexually abused as children, 5%. Stress, 5%. And low sex drive, 5%. So there could be a myriad of other reasons, but these were just some of the reasons that were listed by this particular group. The reasons men solicit are complex and varied. This is really, human trafficking is a very complex issue. If it was an easy problem to solve, we would have solved it years ago, but it's very complex. And the reasons men solicit, as you could see, are really varied. And I have found in my clinical experience working with men that have maybe sex addictions or pornography addictions, things like that, or even men that have bought sex, they have deeper issues of, maybe intimacy issues. They struggle with depression, with loneliness, with other kinds of things that would be systemic. And as I shared before, human behavior is about meeting needs. So in these situations, they were meeting needs in maladaptive ways, inappropriate ways. And they didn't see any path sometimes to get out of these vicious cycles. It's like with any addiction. They often experienced guilt and shame, but didn't know how or where to get help. In their minds, they minimized or dismissed their behavior through cognitive dissonance and a myriad of defense mechanisms and faulty beliefs. Obviously, I feel very strongly about this. We should never treat reasons or excuses as justification for these crimes at all. But sometimes diversion programs can help men gain insights and understanding into root issues that created the conditions for them to solicit in the first place. Through re-education and gaining insights into their choices, men can get the help they need to change their beliefs, their perception, their values, and destructive behaviors. The Men Breaking Free program was a program based out of Minneapolis, and it was the overall program is called Breaking Free, and then underneath that there was a Men Breaking Free program, and it was in operation. It did close its doors several years ago. I'm not sure if that was because of funding or what the reasons for that were, but it was a survivor-driven program supporting victims of human trafficking through a variety of services. And in the past, this Minneapolis-based program also operated a Men Breaking Free program, which helped men who had been charged with soliciting sex. The goal of this one-day intensive program included increased awareness of human trafficking and the cost to victims, buyers, and society. Owning, each man had the opportunity to gain awareness and then to own the destructive impact of buying and selling human beings, and individual and group agreements that included re-education, developing skills, insights, and personal commitments. And it also included a 24-hour hotline. Personally, I don't believe that when people are engaging in these kinds of activities that are addictive behaviors, you can't just take a one-day course and, once and done sort of thing. Now it may have had an impact on some men, especially if they were just at the entry point. And all of these men that were in this program this was their first arrest for buying, purchasing sex. So they couldn't have had a long history of it. They would have been in the system, going to prison at that point. So these were for first-time offenders. But I personally feel that a more lengthy program with ongoing support services going down the road is the answer. And this is their free, Men Breaking Free written discussion guide. So these are some of the discussions that they had. What does it mean to be a real man in our culture, in society today? What kinds of actions and attitudes and behaviors are expected or tolerated of men in society? What do men need in their lives to not purchase sex and live lives of integrity? And through introspection, developing self-control, and gaining new insights and beliefs, men reflected on how being broken and messed up led them to engage in destructive behaviors, and then learned how they could break out of these addictive, destructive behaviors or cycles. This involved challenging their own misperceptions, beliefs, attitudes, and assumptions about females, purchasing sex, their own identity, low self-esteem, and incongruent values, beliefs, and behaviors. So when we think about changing a sex and porn-driven society, we need to focus on reshaping the culture through education and dialogue, and challenging our own faulty beliefs and misperceptions and prejudices. I've honestly worked with medical providers and educators and other people, professionals in communities, and I've actually been in, maybe an ER situation, emergency room situation, where I was bringing a survivor in to get some help, and the staff in the ER would say very disrespectful things, under their breath or on the sidelines about this person, this woman that I was bringing in to help, And I've also worked in pregnancy centers and places like that, and sometimes their attitudes are, well, this is just a little loose girl that likes to get pregnant. And they have no idea that she's being trafficked. They don't know the signs to watch for, and they don't really know how to help her. So one of the things that I feel very passionately about is that we have to get better at identifying what's going on in society. We need to know what the signs are, what to watch for. We need to know how to appropriately intervene if we're a professional person and can safely intervene in a situation, and what our role might be. And we also need to know our resources in a community, so that if we see something, we say something. We call 911, we call the national hotline. I have some little cards that sometimes I'll give to people, like if I was at an airport and I saw something that looked suspicious, then I would hand maybe a young woman in a restroom, I would hand her a card, and it looks like it's a nail polish advertisement for a nail salon. And I'll tell her, this is not a nail polish card. The number on this card is actually the National Human Trafficking Hotline number. It will get you to Iowa to get some help. If you need help, this is a number that you can call if you ever need help. So it's great. I've worked with several organizations now that have created their own little, what I call shoe cards. Sometimes they'll put them in their shoes, and then their trafficker doesn't notice it. But if they did happen to notice that card, they just think, oh, it's just a coupon for nail polish, or it's just a business card for a nail salon, that type of thing. So we need to educate and train our youth and the next generation. And it's so important to start when kids are young. And as they grow and mature, gradually talk more. It's not a once and done conversation. Just talk more about what goes on in society, and teaching kids that if you see something, say something. And if you see something that isn't right, then you call it out or call it in. And sometimes within your peer group, you can really influence your peers. And I think that, we need to develop mandatory diversion programs of substance and accountability for first-time offenders. Increase penalties for buyers to Class A and B felonies with no provision for plea deals. What's happening in Iowa now is these are like misdemeanors, and so it might be a Class D felony possibly, but typically speaking, buyers get off the hook scot-free. Everything is plea bargained down, and they're off scot-free. And if anything, it used to be that the people that were being trafficked, they were the ones that would be arrested and convicted of crimes that they weren't culpable for. How can a 12-year-old girl be culpable if she's being trafficked? And yet it wasn't too long ago in the state of Iowa where these young girls, not just girls, but boys as well, and transgender people would be arrested and convicted of crimes, and they didn't choose to be in those situations. So I think that, lengthy prison sentences for recurring offenses are important. If our speed limits, I drove down here on Interstate 35 tonight, and sometimes, I'll go, maybe 3 or 5 miles over the speed limit, just without noticing, But what if in the state of Iowa they had cameras every quarter mile on every major road, and if you went 5 miles over the speed limit, it was a $1,000 fine automatically? Would any of us be speeding anymore? Probably not. So if we increase penalties and have those stringent penalties, it's going to curtail buyers. That it will make them think twice before they just go out and think, oh, this is easy, I can fly below the radar, nobody's going to catch me kind of attitude. And then just no longer tolerating bad behavior, being complicit or minimizing the seriousness of sexual abuse and assault, human trafficking, and consumption of pornography. Pornography is a gateway into human trafficking. There's a seamless link between human trafficking and pornography. And a lot of people that are groomed into trafficking, and just because I use the word trafficking, it doesn't mean that people have to be moved around. That's another myth. They can live in their homes. Familial trafficking happens. So sometimes families will traffic their own children. And these kids are living in their homes, they're going to school, and then their parents or a family member is trafficking them during other hours of the day or night. So we need to take robust steps to legislate stiffer laws and mandate protections for children, holding companies and websites accountable for their marketing and content. Yeah, a lot of our apps and companies are complicit with allowing things to go on their sites, and it's really important that we really take action with that. So, do John schools make a difference? In 2016, She Has a Name began collecting data on 200 men who completed the Ohio-based program. And then you can read a little more about this. So we know that human trafficking impacts all of society. One young man shared that he had decided to solicit because for years he had been battling loneliness and depression, and these struggles led me to make the worst decision of my life. After graduating from the program, he chose to join a local church. Later, he wrote a letter of encouragement. Through my experience, I found a relationship with God and gained a better understanding of the awful world of human trafficking that prior to this experience I knew nothing about. I wish more than anything that I could take back my mistake, but in a strange way, it's made me a better person. Since this was my first offense and what will be my last, I was allowed to participate in this program. After graduating from the program, I knew that I had to get involved. I now know I can move forward and raise awareness with dreams of ending this horrible issue. He is living proof that through God and the help of others, even a solicitor can be changed into an abolitionist. At the end of the day, that's what our fight is all about. So then the last part of what I have to share here is, what can I do to help? And for all of you, I would encourage you to become educated and involved. You can look at under Shared Hope International, which is, I'm an ambassador with Shared Hope, and they have lots of resources in education. I will come anywhere in the state of Iowa to provide training. I show the movie Grid Shock at no cost. Grid Shock is a documentary about human trafficking that's occurring right now in rural Iowa. It's not New York City and it's not Cambodia, it's rural Iowa. So if you'd like me to come to your organization or a group, I will show that film at no cost, and we'll have a talk story about it afterwards, about things that people can do to become involved. So we want to advocate for robust laws and policies to end human trafficking in Iowa. Engage our representatives and our congressmen to support this legislation. Become involved in groups like North Central Iowa Coalition Against Human Trafficking. We cover 20 counties in North Central Iowa. Financially supporting anti-trafficking service and treatment programs. And you can become an ambassador or a defender with Shared Hope International. There's lots of ways to volunteer or become involved. Sometimes it's just, going out for coffee with your congressman or your neighbor, or maybe you read something in the newspaper or hear something on the news, and your neighbor or friend is talking about, oh, I heard about this sting operation or this trafficking situation that happened. And sharing what you know with other people, it helps educate our communities and people that we know within our network. And we want to also advocate for professional trainings. I work with law enforcement and train with Hope for Justice. I do the mental health part of the training. They do the law enforcement piece, and we train together all of our sheriff's departments and EMTs and first response teams and police in the state of Iowa. And so we want to advocate for those professional trainings. Also prevention education. I'll go into the schools and do online safety and any other place, because this is so critical. And engage our faith leaders and educators to discuss these issues and identify community resources. And it's important, most of you probably have kids and grandkids, right? So, talk with them about online safety. Talk with them, get some brochures, some information. Host me, I'll come and do some training in your community on these things, and invite your kids or grandkids to come. We want to all be part of creating stronger, safer communities. So there's resources for those who are struggling. You can search for local counselors who specialize in addictions and or church support groups like Celebrate Recovery or buyer intervention programs. There's other organizations like support the work of demand reduction groups like Demand Abolition and Fight the New Drug, Triple X Church, and Covenant Eyes. Those are some organizations. And Just Men Arizona, I happen to know Nick Limbo. He's the state coordinator in Arizona. And Nick works to train men to disrupt the commercial sex market at the point of sale. So a team interacts with sex buyers through fake sex ads, but rather than naming and shaming, they reach in to grasp the humanity out of the person by painting a picture of who they could be and giving them the option of getting out. So there's Nick's website there, and I believe that is it. I'm not sure if you folks have questions or comments. Feel free to ask anything. I'm not sure if I'll have the answer, but I'll try. Yes.
With the, I'm just going to say the former president's attitude towards a lot of this and the talk that he has indulged in, has that affected the situation? He has said, you know, what I'm talking about.
Well,
I mean, he's created an atmosphere, sort of an acceptance of some of these behaviors.
okay. I don't want to get into politics tonight.
Not
Yeah,
really, I'm saying he's a person
right.
who has had an influence,
Mhm.
and has he influenced the situation at this point?
I think we have influences on both sides of the fence that have been destructive, and I'll just state that, okay? What we have going on at our border right now, I have friends working down at the border, and we have children being trafficked at our border by the thousands, okay? So we have, and I don't want to get into the weeds with all of this because, you know, we can all, at the end of the day, have different viewpoints and opinions, and I want to respect everybody's right as citizens to hold to their own opinions and viewpoints.
So I'm not asking for your opinion.
Yeah.
I'm asking, did that affect the
We
culture?
can't hear her question. What was her question?
I am asking that with the kind of talk and the actions that have been taken recently by people in our government, has it affected the attitude of the public towards some of these things? An acceptance, perhaps, of the way women have been talked about and treated.
I honestly feel that we can go back through any history in any country. We can go back to the colonial times. George Washington owned slaves. We can go all the way back in our history, and we can find people from all political viewpoints that have been, you know, had beliefs that were destructive, to objectify people, for, you know, to condone slavery, to support slavery, all of these kinds of things, you know. But we need to understand that right now, in this current administration, right now, we have more human trafficking going on. It includes labor and sex trafficking. I'm working very hard in north central Iowa to go into communities where people are being brought in from, you know, the southern border and other places, and they are being trafficked. So, you know, it's a serious problem, and it's not getting better. So
you
we
didn't
just
really
need.
answer my question.
I did. I said you go back into history, and there's negative things from every, if you want to say every administration or every period
So
in
the
history.
So the words that have been used and the things they talk about now have not affected our acceptance of some of these things. When
Okay,
he's-
I think
when-
she's answered her question, Louise.
You think so?
She's not gonna give you the answer you wanna hear, I'm thinking. But anyway,
I
could we?
have a question.
Okay, we have more questions.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So we can pretty much say that Johnny Gosh and Eugene, I can't remember his last
Can't hear
name.
you.
Oh, Johnny Gosh and Eugene, the young boys that were, Eugene Martin, yeah. So we can pretty much just know that they were probably trafficked.
I honestly am not familiar with who you're talking about there. I must have
Johnny
missed it.
Gosh, Johnny Gosh.
He was a little newspaper boy that
Yeah.
disappeared maybe 20 or 30 years ago. and
longer
then
than that.
found.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's entirely possible. And, you know, there's a lot of these cold cases where they haven't necessarily been able to prove that, and they may never be able to,
Right.
you know. But there's a high probability that, you know, that could have happened, you know.
Okay.
So,
Yes.
You mainly talked about men that are involved in the sex trafficking. Where do the women come in? Are there women also involved in this? And would you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, statistically speaking, buyers, people purchasing sex, are typically men. The lion's share, the majority of people that are buying sex are men, okay? It's just a fact. It's not a prejudice against men or women or anything. It's just factual information, okay? But anybody can be a trafficker. I could be a trafficker. You could be a trafficker. You know, it can be any gender, any race, any background of an individual, any culture. Anybody can be a trafficker. So people do engage in that. And so there's not one particular profile for what a trafficker could be, who they could be.
I wasn't considering so much as a trafficker as just a cooperator.
The user.
Cooperator with the system.
Okay, yeah. Well, and there again, that can be anyone, because when I lived in Hawaii, we had a lot of corruption in the police department there. And the police, when I first moved there, I was reporting things to the police, and it would seem to go up the chain a little ways, and then it would just stop. And you'd wonder on these cases that seemed to be some cut and dried things going on, and everybody was aware of some of these trafficking operations. They're thinking, what the heck is happening here? These things are just getting kind of swept under the rug. Well, come to find out, I actually spoke with one of the traffickers one day. He didn't know who I was, but he said, I want you to know that I am an upstanding person in this community, and I'm here to help kids get their education. And he says, and I know police, I have friends in the police force. And he started naming names. And so when these cases would go up the line, I'm thinking, okay, that's where that got derailed, possibly, you know. So we had a lot of issues with that. So yes, there's a lot of people out in society that are complicit and that will work with the trafficking operations and you know, help out with it. And they get kickback for it, of course.
This example is Jeffrey Epstein's friend.
Exactly, yeah. Yes.
so are you,
Oh, this lady in the back,
okay,
yeah.
Melody, you mentioned that you go into gas stations and you notice a young woman in a bathroom. What do you see that would identify that girl as needing a fingernail card?
Well, I went into Panda Express, and I've been in Starbucks, and I've been other places, the public library where my 14-year-old daughter worked at that time, and I happened to be in there checking out some books, and I saw this trafficker come in. But, you know, traffickers can be anywhere, okay? And there's a lot of it that's going on online. Since 2021, you know, what do we have? You know, we had COVID, and then we were coming out of COVID, and the traffickers will go where the market is, okay? So all of our kiddos were home from school doing online schooling. Do you think their parents were all hovering above them like helicopters? No, they weren't, realistically, you know. And so the traffickers knew that, and they were, you know, targeting kids online, and these kids had no clue who these people were. They might pose to be a cute 16-year-old boy that this girl just thought was such a heartthrob, and she gets to know him, and he's so friendly and so fun to talk to, and then little by little they're groomed in. And before I moved to Hawaii in 2014, I had 4 girls on my caseload that had been trafficked from a porn ring out of Kansas City. And all of these girls were from little Iowa towns, Sheffield and Garner and Hampton, you know, all these little communities. And they were from good families, so they did not have the typical vulnerabilities that you might think of. One of the girls was in a foster home. And so she was more what we might consider typically an at-risk child, you know, to be trafficked. But all of the rest of them were from good families, and they just happened to be ensnared through these traffickers online. That's why it's so important. These people don't know what to watch for. But this girl, I'll just share one example. She came in Panda Express one day, and she was dressed, you know, how people dress, you know, scantily dressed, and, you know, her hair was dyed. She had lots of makeup on, high heels, you know, things like that. And she came in with her trafficker, and her trafficker was doing all the talking, and he ordered for her just a little small bowl of food, and she was looking down at the ground. She was not making eye contact. They're told, you don't make eye contact with the servers, the people that are in the restaurants. You don't make eye contact with anyone. So she was looking down. He ordered for her. They went quickly through the line. They sat down, and she just glanced. I was sitting at another table. She just glanced up at me, and just momentarily, and, you know, just sometimes, you know, they say the eyes are the window of the soul. You can read people's emotions and what's going on sometimes in their lives. And she was deathly afraid, and she needed help. I could tell that. She was really scared. And I wanted to just get up and help her in the worst way, but I can't, you know, that wouldn't have been safe or appropriate to intervene that way. So I just thought, all right, if she goes into the restroom, if he allows her to go into the bathroom, I will follow suit, and I'll just casually walk into the restroom, very nonchalant, and give her a little card that she can, you know, it looks like a nail polish card or something, and say, you know, sometimes my screening questions that I use with people, I'll say, are you okay? Do you need some help? Are you living in a safe situation? Are you feeling safe where you're at right now? And sometimes, they don't always, most of the time they don't see themselves as victims. They think that this pimp that they're with is their boyfriend, you know, or someone there to take care of them. And they look at them in a different sort of way because they've been so brainwashed and gaslighted and manipulated. So they don't often see themselves as being victims. But sometimes you can catch them in that cycle. And my daughter is a nurse practitioner, and she flew back from some training in Colorado and was on a flight coming back to Minneapolis. And there was a woman on the plane that was being trafficked, and she had just been picked up by the trafficker 2 weeks before in Florida. And she sat down next to my daughter, and the trafficker wanted to sit by her, but the flight was full. And he tried to take my daughter's seat, and she goes, "Excuse me, sir, this is my seat." And she showed, you know, her ticket, and he said, "Well, I need to sit here because this is my girlfriend and we need to sit together." And she said, "Well, I'm not going to give up my seat." And then the flight attendant came down and said, "Sir, you're going to need to go back to your seat," which was 5 or 6 rows back. So long story short on that situation, my daughter texted me and says, "Mom, what do I do?" And I told her, I said, when you have a safe opportunity, very casually, nonchalantly, get up and go back and talk with the flight attendant privately whisper to them and say, this young woman has disclosed that she needs help. She's in a,
Had she disclosed to
she
somebody?
told my daughter, after a few minutes, she whispered to her and said, I need help. I'm being trafficked. And she said, I was picked up 2 weeks ago in Florida and I can't get away from this guy. And, I need to get out. I need some help. So the airline did an awesome job. Delta Airline, they did awesome. They followed protocols to a T. And they, called ahead, made sure someone was in Minneapolis, ready and waiting there. But from that point on, the ball got dropped. And I see missed and botched opportunities all the time. I could go on all night sharing situations like that. But when they got off the plane, the flight attendants, dismissed row by row, so this trafficker could not rush up to be with, his traffic, victim. And so the flight attendants were kind of standing guard there, And so my daughter and this young woman got off the plane. There were 2 police officers standing at the gate, you guys. And this was a loaded flight. People were coming off, and there was a lot of commotion going on. And these 2 police officers approached this woman and said, what's going on? My daughter was standing right there. And of course, this woman is freaking out on the inside. She's looking behind her thinking, oh my gosh, this guy's going to come off the plane. I'm going to be in big trouble. He's going to know that I said something. And so she's just flooded with all that. And then sure enough, the pimp comes off the plane. And then these 2 officers take them into 2 adjoining rooms, but they're really close. It would be like the one room was there at that desk and the other room was right here. And so, you could see kind of across the hall. So this woman goes in with one of the officers, and my daughter was with her. And my daughter said, can you share with this officer, will you share with him what you shared with me on the plane? I didn't share anything with you. I don't have anything to share. No, everything's fine. Everything's fine. Can I go now? Can I go now? And of course she was freaked out. Well, who's going to disclose information in that situation? Her trafficker's right across the way. And of course, he's denying things. So they had nothing to go on. And this guy took her by the arm, kind of forcefully, and they walked out of the airport. And my daughter went to her car in Minneapolis and sat behind the wheel and just sobbed. And she said, Mom, I can't. She said, I know this woman is probably going to be beaten to a pulp or worse. She said, that guy looked really, really angry. And so he's going to take it out on her. So we have missed and botched opportunities. That's why it's so important for our police to be trained, for educators to be trained, for medical professionals to be trained. All of us need to know the signs and what to watch for.
Can you explain what should have happened once they got off the plane? Could you?
What should have happened is one officer should have, and maybe TSA or something, but one officer should have gently approached, and I teach people how to gently approach people. You don't want to come up firing questions at them because they're already in a state of trauma and, red alert. So, they get flooded very easily. So it's really important for you to stay calm, be gentle, ask one question at a time, say, well, can we go over, I'm going to take you, with your permission, I'm going to take you over here to this room and we'll just sit down and talk for a couple minutes, and then my daughter would have no doubt probably gone with. And so the one officer would have taken that young woman, and then the other officer would have waited for the prospective, pimp to come off the plane. He would have approached him, and then the pimp would have said, what's going on? And he would have said something like, well, there was an issue with the ticket, or we're just checking out something with regards to the tickets, or make up something, and say, can you come with me, and we'll, I'll talk to you privately, you know. So that's, you know, one way that they could have handled it.
So back to Panda Express, what happened?
What happened in that situation was she did not go into the restroom. I had no safe way to intervene, but I knew something was going on because the guy saw her just momentarily just kind of glance up at me quickly, like, I need help, I'm desperate, you know. And if I would have had a safe way to intervene, I would have. But then, you know, he let her just take a few bites of food. Malnutrition is one of the signs you watch for too. And sexually transmitted diseases and scars or tattoos or bruises or things like that, those are all common signs. So anyway, he took this woman and, you know, he saw her glance at me and he got up and he went and sat in front, you know, so he was blocking the way so she could no longer look at me. He situated his chair so that it would, you know, block our eye contact, and he slammed his chair down and just sat there. So who would do that in a normal situation, you know? So you see some telltale signs sometimes of what's going on. There's been other situations where I have been, or other people that I've trained have been able to go in and safely intervene in situations. So if you see something, you have an opportunity to give someone the national hotline number. It will call into Iowa, and you can also call 911. Now, not every police dispatch is trained in our state, and some of them will just kind of brush it off. They think, it's not a priority, you know, and others will move on it. So, are we out of time?
Well, if we have another question, we'll take it. Otherwise, I think it is time to.
Okay, yes.
Just make a suggestion. I understand the frustration behind it, but.
Mike, talk up. Yeah.
Louder.
Oh,
louder.
okay. The comment about A and B felonies and not allowing plea deals, that I get. But you have to remember when you get into that kind of thing that prosecutors, juries for that matter, and judges all have a lot of discretion.
Right.
And there's a lot of research that suggests that if you ramp up penalties for particular crimes very quickly, that has an odd effect of essentially all of those folks looking at it saying this is unreasonable, and consequently it might not be a plea deal, but the charges that are brought would be substantially less. You might actually end up with a situation where they're less than they would have been without that reform. Now, I'm not saying don't do anything,
Right.
but I'm saying you've got a lot of educating to do all the way through the system.
Exactly. And I agree with you. I think that there has to be those safeguards put into place. Were you aware that this last year they passed a law that traffickers it used to be a C and D class felony for anybody trafficking individuals. If you traffic, now the law is if you traffic a minor, it's automatically a class A felony. And if you're trafficking an adult, it could be an A or a B, but it's typically a B felony. So, yeah.
Very, very sobering presentation, very informative. Thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that concludes the program tonight.
Thanks, John. It's good to